And action. You are wrong about House of the Dragon. First off, let me start by saying I am glad there are people enjoying a show set in this world after the horrendous end to the original Game of Thrones TV show. However, none of you are being honest when you say this show captures the essence of early Game of Thrones. This show is at best comparable to season 6 or 7 in terms of quality, maybe, just maybe, season 5 at times, if we are being generous. We should and need to demand better of these writers. Otherwise, what happened to other sci fi and fantasy worlds will happen here. This will become a generic, basic copy of other movies and TV shows with a Game of Thrones paint job. That being said, I am shocked that Martin, who is more involved in this show, would approve of what is being shown on the screen. And it was he who wanted this first season to be this time jumping backstory that honestly isn't all that interesting. Now, I'm not sure what I have to do to showcase my expertise in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, so let's try this. Cold Hands is not Benjen Stark. Okay, I know. This has been confirmed by the author George R. R. Martin himself, and everyone knows this, right? Okay, so that's not proof. How about this? Cold Hands is Tyrion's uncle Tyrion, a Lannister. For you see, to go west, you must go east, and hands of gold are always cold. Now, if you don't get what I just said, that's okay. It's a deep cut that has a lot of moving parts. But for those that know what I just said, you should be satisfied. Okay, now that I've proven myself with my own theory that I've never come across, mind you, I want to be upfront about one important fact. The books will always take precedent and priority over the show. However, I did not read the books pertaining to House of the Dragon. Reason being, I simply don't care. I think it's wrong for authors sometimes to further explore their worlds in other works when part of the fun and enjoyment of the original work and what made it so popular was having a little bit of mystery associated with it, a little bit of unknown surrounding the past within the world. Not to mention, I feel the author should finish the original series that they set out to do before giving us a pretty milquetoast anthology history, or whatever. That's my own personal gripe. So, with all that aside, I want to acknowledge I'm aware there are some changes from the books that the showrunners made, and to that, I simply say this show needs to stand on its own. This is not supposed to be a show that requires you to have read the books, and I've seen people look to the books and basically make them necessary to enjoy this show. And to me, that's ridiculous. Right out of the gate, that is a huge problem. If you've read the books and you're enjoying the show, good for you, right on, but you cannot expect people to have to go online, search up what really happened in the books, and then say, oh, this is a neat switch up. No, it has to make sense and be coherent in the show world by itself. Okay, all that's out of the way. Let's jump in and let me just explain to you how I see the charm of the series, A Song of Ice and Fire, and the TV show, Game of Thrones, and why it made fantasy and medieval history so exciting. It has to do with having a subtle focus on the common people within the world. Yes, ultimately, it is a Game of Thrones. I get that. But it is through exploring the lives of people living in the world with little to no power and how the actions of the elites affect them, but also how the people who are the peasants can band together and affect change around them, knowingly or unknowingly sometimes. It's these moments that really ground the books and the original show, at least for the first 4 seasons, and really make some strong and compelling narrative storytelling plots. You get none of that in House of the Dragon. And people, before we get into it, let me just point out that basically everyone at the Night's Watch is this type of person I'm describing. Almost everyone Arya interacts with also fits into this category. Now, in the show, this kind of gets off the rails a bit, but in the books, Brienne interacts with a ton of common people, and it ultimately leads her on her own honor bound versus what is right or best to do quest. The Brotherhood without banners, full of common people who are basically climbing up the socioeconomic ladder through this in a way. The commons are completely absent from House of the Dragon, and thus the world feels hollow. Yes, there are some big set pieces with a lot of extras, but because we don't get to know them, they feel like props, much like the later seasons of Game of Thrones felt. And this show dares to pretend that it's going to showcase these people. But then they have a dragon just stomp on them in an attempt to be a metaphor. The obvious visualization of dragons killing common people without any regard, similar to how the elites, the Targaryens, the House of the Dragons, also don't seem to care about the common people and will stomp on them without even noticing. However, the show is its own dragon stomping on its own prop people in almost a double metaphor, and the irony is so juicy. The second big difference is the lack of more honorable characters. Right now, as far as I can tell in House of the Dragon, there is but one character who fits this criteria, and so help me if any of you out there are yelling Damon at their screens. Are you ready for it? It's the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Damon and Rhaenyra's children may fit this category, but we don't spend enough time with him in this first season. It's too hard to say. Now, I want to try and quickly clarify what I mean here because I can already see the responses coming in about how Eddard is not to be looked up to, how Robb Stark's honor was incorrect, how Jaime saved people by acting dishonorably, and yes, all that is true. But what the beauty of both the early show and the books capture is what honor really means. This show has no character that has the struggles that come with trying to uphold these impossible honor-bound traditions. Maybe we will see at some point, but right now, the only character struggling with things such as honor and what is right is our doofus King Viserys, and he is dead. He was also a fan favorite character despite having almost no redeeming qualities, and it's because of his very own internal struggle. He was interesting, but the rest of these one-dimensional characters are almost an exaggeration of the characters that came before them. Otto is Tywin, Larys is Littlefinger, Damon is Jaime. But there's nothing deeper to go into here. It's all boring. Remember how Littlefinger went from a master manipulator to standing around waiting to be killed? Larys is closer to the latter. Jaime has one of the biggest and best character arcs and progression the world has ever seen. Damon has zero arc, zero progression. He is cool because he's got a cool actor playing an anti-hero. That's it. You got suckered in. Don't even try. There is no progression. Doing random stuff in a cool slow-mo way is not progression or character arc. The showrunners are even questioning why fans like him because they don't know what they're doing and they don't really have him doing anything cool anyway. In fact, to my eyes, he comes off as rather weak and not very intimidating. He has to cheat at a joust. He can't really kill a single pirate Captain Jack Sparrow. He either accidentally murders his wife or gets lucky in murdering her and then has a hard time finishing the job. I feel like Barristan Selmy watching this. I could cut down all these nights like carving a cake with that guy right there. Third point I want to make about this is there are no deeper plots going on in the background. Everything you see is right in front of you. You could argue the plot from Otto to put Aegon on the Iron Throne might check this box, but it's not good enough. It's simply not good enough. It's a very simple plot that doesn't even need hints to grasp the full picture, and Otto flat out tells us what he's doing during his first moments on screen. It's not a mystery, and it's not even that intriguing. The plan was to wait for the king to die and then just say, Aegon is the new king. Think about Littlefinger's plan that he tells Ned to take the throne. As long as Ned plays along, he is going to hand King Joffrey over to him, and until King Joffrey comes of age, Eddard Stark is in control. And if they cannot subdue Joffrey's evil tendencies, they can kill him and put his younger brother on the throne. Ned can marry his daughter to either Joffrey or Tommen, and he can essentially rule for the rest of his life as hand to whichever king. That plan has way more going for it than Otto simply saying, my grandson is now king. So those are my three main points where this show misses the mark from a Game of Thrones perspective. But there's another even more important aspect to this, at least for myself, and that is storytelling and structure. One of the best things about these stories is seeing how characters and their actions, no matter how benign, have consequences. I think about Robb Stark, and he won every single battle, and yet he ended up losing the war because he had a moment of weakness that he believed wasn't weakness. In fact, he believed in that moment he was doing the honorable thing. Yes, he was breaking a vow, but it was to uphold an even deeper traditional vow. And that moment cost him dearly. This, along with his trusting friendship with Theon, ultimately leads to his death. Now, because of time jumps in this show, we don't really get to see any of the immediate aftermath of characters' actions. This hinders the story as we jump many months or even years into the future, and the actions in question are rarely brought up again. Their consequences have either already played out or have been long forgotten. So you see, these time jumps are no way to tell a story. And the fact that it was Martin's requirement to have the first season be backstory like this is simply a bad idea. The entire first 8 episodes of this show could be told in 30 minutes tops, with introductions and flashbacks. There are some nonsensical and useless scenes and plot angles that go nowhere. The crab feeder was not needed. Damon wanting the throne, acting out, and then being a lazy bum on Pentos after all that, not needed. Rhaenyra and her father having the same conversation about her being heir for 5 episodes, not needed. The on-again, off-again relationship between Alicent and Rhaenyra, not needed. The hunting episode, what a snooze fest. I know Martin had to stick up his butt about the hunt in Game of Thrones due to the low budget, but get over it, my man. You don't need to make an entire episode just to show us what you actually meant by hunt. We get it. All we needed was Damon acting out a little bit, seducing Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra then seducing and then further rejecting Sir Criston Cole. Rhaenyra's husband, Laenor's death, as well as Strong's death, if that's the way you want to go. Aemon losing his eye and getting a dragon, but the rest was pointless and boring. Matt Stone and Trey Parker can explain it better than me. If you are writing your beat outline and the words "and then" can appear between each scene or beat, it's bad writing. The word you're looking for is "therefore" or "but" between every single scene. But if you look at House of the Dragon, literally every scene can be followed by "and then." This is just basic storytelling techniques. With that out of the way, the action. Okay, so I want to first say Game of Thrones is not about the action. And it was at its best when the action was intriguing but supported the political drama that was the main part of the show. So I don't understand how people can let this stuff go, starting all the way back at the very beginning during the Joust. It is straight up laughable, and it's proof that people writing do not understand that actions have consequences in this world. When Damon cheats at the joust, and he did cheat, mind you, it would actually do more for the story to have people in world be outraged by his actions and react accordingly. And then have Viserys say he's not going to do anything about it and it's not a big deal. That way, we further establish Viserys as a lazy, incompetent king, and Damon as a rule-breaking rogue. But the way they film this, it is not even clear he broke rules when he definitely did, and nobody, not even the father of the man that he almost crippled, does anything about it. Barely reacts, doesn't even blink an eye. That's simply ridiculous. This was Alicent's brother that could have been seriously injured because Damon didn't want to play fair and felt he had to cheat. Once again, also undercutting Damon as an intimidating warrior and making all these characters react nonsensically to him. The joust goes from that to having a bunch of random knights killing each other. And while this did happen in history, those actions always had consequences. The houses that those knights belonged to would be severely reprimanded. Guards would have been brought out to try to break up the commotion. There is no response. It's literally just showing us characters killing each other and everyone cheering it on. That is not what would have happened. We also get random people killing each other while trying to court Rhaenyra. No guards jump in and just let a duel unfold before their eyes. Now, at least in this one, they bring up the consequences later on. But we still didn't get to see the big reactions when it's so fresh in everyone's mind. We get it years later. And at that point, it's too little too late. We don't get to see how Alicent is able to convince her husband to keep a wacko, loose cannon of a knight, Criston Cole, on the Kingsguard. He murdered someone at a wedding. The princess's wedding, no less. Now, I know it's different in the books, but again, in the show, this is now canon for the show, and it has to stand up, and it simply doesn't. It's a bad scene, poorly written, and affects the plot massively. Furthermore, his insolence, saying he's actually more loyal to Alicent than the king, would surely make people suspicious and probably have some requests to remove him, especially from the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, because he can't control his own knight. We don't get any of that. Those would have made for some great scenes, mind you. Now, speaking of Sir Cole, the book changes or inaccuracies. The fact that Criston Cole was training the young princes, despite Kingsguard not training people, as found in Book 4 of A Song of Ice and Fire, Cersei quite clearly explains that the Kingsguard's tasks are not training princes. She makes it very clear. This is actually a little bit of a plot point in that book. The fact that Damon couldn't defeat a lowly pirate, then had plot armor so that he could win that fight with the crab feeder, and the crab feeder being so easily tricked after 3 years of besting Damon, it's just lazy. It's lazy writing. Now, I don't mind the off-screen death here. I think it works. It was a good subversion of expectations, but the build-up stinks. Damon was banished multiple times from entering the Red Keep, but every single time he just strolls right back into court, and we're left wondering, was he ever pardoned, or was there ever a conversation where the king, Viserys, was going to let him back in, or did he just stroll in and Viserys decided to do nothing? We're not even sure what happened there. So that's just left a mystery, and it would be nice just to have a little bit of dialogue clearing that up. His murder of his first wife is dumb. It makes her look dumb, despite trying to make her look cool, and I thought she was going to be cool. It makes him look dumb and weak. What happened there? Did he murder her? Did she fall accidentally? It's not even clear what happened there, which was their whole point, and I'm going to get to that. Was there any pressure from the Vale to have a trial for Damon? What did that look like? Did anyone challenge him to a duel? Were there any other houses talking amongst each other to try to figure out how to get Viserys to act on Damon? Otto Hightower's back somehow. The king believed Otto Hightower was trying to manipulate the king's decisions regarding succession. The scene in which the king comes to that realization is poorly written, but that's okay. We're just going to undo it immediately. Otto Hightower comes back right after Lord Strong is killed, and he resumes his place as Hand of the King. Why would Otto Hightower be allowed back if the king thought he was doing some bad stuff behind the scenes? Yes, he probably could have been convinced. He was a doofus after all. But show us that. That's interesting to me. I don't want to just jump back and forth like that. We don't need any of this stuff either for the overall story going forward. It's a waste of time. And the biggest waste of time, I know I'm going to get pushed back for this, are those gruesome and long birthing scenes. I get it. It's Game of Thrones. We're going to see some nudity. Although, apparently not. We don't really see any nudity in this first season. We're going to see the nitty gritty, dirty realism of medieval fantasy. And I like that. I get it. That's what this is all supposed to be. And I get that childbirth was dangerous for women and women were forced into it. No question. That's one of my favorite aspects of Brienne, Arya, Cersei, and Sansa. They have stories that are coming from different perspectives, but they're all sharing in the same hatred of having men tell them what to do with their bodies. But how is this any better than simply using women as sexual objects for men to fight over? I don't get it. To me, there's no difference between this and having a bunch of inappropriate sexual scenes. It doesn't add anything to the story. And why are we getting it every other episode? You don't need that many to make your point. In fact, having just one probably makes the point stronger, because now you just sort of do it too often and it just becomes commonplace and it loses its shock value. So just simply continuously including this is actually countering the very point you're trying to make, I think. I'm not really sure what that is. Now, here is one of the biggest damning pieces of evidence that I could think of off the top of my head, and that is memorable lines from the show. I have a ton in my head from the Game of Thrones TV show, and some of them came from the books, but others did not. They were actually written by none other than D&D. I know, blasphemy, right? Those guys can't write. Yes, they can. They wrote some good scenes. It's true. Some of the best scenes in the show, in fact, were written by them with no part from the books to lean on. Shocking, right? I know. The showing of the Red Wedding, Tywin chastising Joffrey one-on-one, and one of my personal favorites, Cersei and Robert Baratheon talking about how their marriage holds the realm together. It's beautiful. There is not a single comparable scene in this entire first season. Is that not a problem for anyone else? I'm not saying they have to outdo Game of Thrones. I don't think that's possible, but there's not a single scene that makes me do a double take here. Also, giving all these characters easy outs so people can root for both sides of this conflict is simply bad. I don't know if some of this is in the books, but it is just dumb writing, and perhaps Martin, if this is in the books, is declining as a writer. Like, Alicent both misunderstanding her heavily dementia husband and thinks he then wants to usurp Rhaenyra in his dying breath, then trying to stop her father because she didn't think it through and didn't realize that her father would then try to kill Rhaenyra. Heck, her father, Otto Hightower, has an out because he does think the realm is better off with his own grandson sitting the throne because the realm doesn't want a female on the Iron Throne. Now, Damon is Matt Smith, and so that's why people like him. I guess he kind of likes his brother, and that's why people can rally around him, but it's not really doing it for me. I think part of the problem here is the writers are scared to tell deeper stories because they don't want to confuse their audience. They don't want their audience to feel a need to uncover the underlying reasons for a character's actions. They're going to simply tell you how it is, and then you just get to watch. A lot of these characters don't make a ton of sense. Damon killing his first wife and then being somewhat okay with his second wife, maybe even loving her, and then even loving their kids, perhaps, although that was a deleted scene, so I don't know if that's canon. But are we going to explore that at all? No, it's in the past. You could try to compare him to Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister came out as a straight up villain to start the show, but then we started to feel sympathy, and we started to understand some of his actions. You don't need to understand all of them. And even the ones that you disagree with, you can at least understand them. Jaime Lannister throwing a kid out of a window. That is a bad decision. But in the moment, you kind of get what's going on there. I still disagree with it. I think he was still a bad dude, but that's where the sympathy starts coming in. Once you start to understand his backstory, he still did those actions. It doesn't undo them. It just allows him to grow from it. But I don't feel any character in this show can actually grow from their action. Larys is the only straight up villain right now. Otto Hightower is probably the best written character right now. He's obviously modeled after Tywin Lannister, who was never a true outright villain. He did a lot of bad things, but you always understood his underlying motivation. Larys, meanwhile, is straight up dumb and evil, and not even close to the level of brilliance of Littlefinger or Varys, or even Qyburn for that matter. He is more like a shrewd Grand Maester Pycelle. That ought to tick some people off. Leave it in the comments down below. I'll deal with you later. So all of that was the first 8 episodes of the first season of House of the Dragon. And like I said before, that all could have been condensed into probably 30 minutes, maybe half of the first episode. That's what it should have been. Now the show really begins. Episode 9, for the most part, is good. I actually enjoyed this episode. I know there are differences from the books. There's the difference in the relationship between Aemon and Aegon, and the coronation is much smaller. But the only glaring issue from the show and from a show story perspective is Rhaenys bursting out of the dragon pit and letting everyone live. Now, she will eventually claim it's not her war to start, but now she's going to make thousands die in a war she easily could have prevented. And someone who is supposed to be queen and thinks she would have made a great queen would have made the right decision there. She went from almost being an interesting character to dissect and understand to being a stupid character that I don't want to see anymore. Episode 9 is the best episode of the entire season, and it also has the biggest fail of the entire season. So you win some, you lose some. All right, episode 10, the last one. Now, this thing has some strange ideas as well. We do get another big birthing scene. I mean, we're going to get one every other episode, it seems. This one was pretty gruesome, and it ended in a stillbirth. We do get some interesting ideas here between the Kingsguard, knowing that there's 2 identical twin brothers on the Kingsguard, and they're on opposite sides. I was hoping we would get some more Kingsguard action in this season, but oh well. Then some really dumb characters start yapping. Rhaenys is now just dumb, so I don't care what she has to say. Early in the show, it was clear she should have been queen, but now I'm not so sure. I think Viserys maybe did a better job. Her husband is making a recovery. Yay! I thought this would lead to some interesting political dynamics because Rhaenyra's child, Luke, is heir to Lord Corlys's realm. So if Lord Corlys is alive, but doesn't help Rhaenyra, maybe he needs to go. But he lives, and after a quick pep talk from his wife, he decides to back the woman that he thinks murdered his own son. And knowing that his own quote-unquote grandsons are not related to him. I guess you could chalk this up to Rhaenyra being the lesser of 2 evils, but these characters, they change their minds so often at the slightest pushback. Like, Rhaenyra doesn't want to fight, but wants to find allies. And she thinks that it's best for the realm to not push her claim. Yet she's looking for allies to help push her claim. She needs to pick a lane and stick to it. You see, this would be, on the surface, an interesting dilemma for a character to struggle with. But then you remember, Otto, Alicent, and Alicent's sons are really bad and nasty, especially the sons. So when Damon starts trying to talk sense to Rhaenyra, I was getting excited. Finally, Damon is making sense himself, and he's doing something important, and oh wait, now he's choking the queen for no reason. This character, what the hell? What do you people see in this character? I love Matt Smith, but this character does nothing for me. I do not get it. Then the queen agrees to send her 2 eldest sons as messengers. Now, this is as dumb as Robb Stark letting Theon Greyjoy go as a messenger to his own father. This is that level of dumb. And we know how that turned out. At least Robb thought Theon was his best friend and thought Theon wouldn't turn on him. But Rhaenyra has no reason to believe that any lord she sends her sons to are accepting of her. If they are not on her side and they're instead on the High Towers, or I guess you could say the Targaryens, but I guess Team Green is what we're going with, even in world, which is weird. But yeah, if you send your son to a lord who's on Team Green, it is their duty to capture your messenger son, who is heir to the throne. So this makes no sense. I don't know how anyone lets her send these kids off. It's ridiculous. Any lord would capture those kids as a reward for the quote-unquote true king, according to them. Then we get this weird Aemon scene, which may have happened in the books, I don't know, but he tries to take this little kid's eye out because he thinks he's being cool and tough. Now, I get he's definitely psychologically and emotionally damaged by both losing his eye, being the second brother to a doofus king himself, and just all around wanting to be a badass like Damon for some reason. He's trying to like model himself after that guy. He then tries to attack this little kid and wants this kid to like stab his own eye out. The kid refuses, and then when Aemon goes to do it himself, the Baratheon guards intervene. Where was this earlier in the show when all these people were killing each other? It doesn't make any sense. He's already saying he's pledging for Aegon and Aemon by extension. And then he's going to have the gall, the audacity to prevent the prince of the kingdom from taking an enemy prisoner. It's straight up ridiculous. Now, I don't know, again, if that's in the books. Maybe Martin found a better way, a clever way around this. But that is so bad. It's so dumb. And once again, characters just cannot have any autonomy in their stories. We're just gonna keep them going, no matter what. So after Aemon is denied his rightful prisoner, he chases him on Dragonback. Now, Aemon's dragon is much larger than Luke's dragon. And we did get a little bit of a hint to this, and I know it's a big book change that people are upset about, but I just wanted to point this out there, that the show within its own world kind of tried to preempt this when Viserys said early in the season that control over the dragons is somewhat of an illusion, meaning the dragons are kind of acting on their own accord and they're letting you ride along. So in the show, Vhagar disobeys and eats Varaxis and Luke. This once again adds another out to these characters. So Aemon no longer killed Luke because he wanted to. It was an accident and a misunderstanding. This show is so unwilling to let characters show their true nature. or for anyone to make decisions on their own, be they wise or a mistake. Otto Hightower might be the only character they write properly. The writers don't want actions to have consequences. They want every character to be ready and able to do anything to fit the contrived story. The worst written character of all has to be Alicent. While her father had a real plot going to usurp the crown, Alicent was busy with her own plot. It happened to be the same plot, so it works well together. But then one night, her husband makes a toast, and Alicent, who has spent decades preparing her own children and herself to usurp the crown from her former best friend, in that moment decides that's wrong. So now she's ready to accept Rhaenyra. She's now a good guy. Oh, but wait, she then misunderstands Viserys in his dying breath. So now she's usurping the throne, but it's a mistake. And so it's not even her fault. Let her make a freaking decision on her own. My God. You know, we could have got a really good version of a late Game of Thrones Cersei Lannister. Instead, we get an alternate reality young Sansa Stark. Get a grip. You can't redeem or praise a character that flip-flops so much and just does stuff based on the last thing some character told her. It's brutal. I said this earlier in this review, but it's a shame Otto doesn't have anyone to plot with, because everyone is stupid. There was none of that in early Game of Thrones. Every character on the council had at least some competency there. I'm not even sure the characters on this council can read. It's ridiculous. So we've got two pivotal decisions in this story, one by Alicent and one by Aemond, that have now been contextualized as, oops, made a mistake, I didn't understand. This makes the entire world feel cheap. The moral complexity and ambiguity is gone. Everyone is just a misunderstood potential good guy. This isn't how it works. The beauty of Game of Thrones was that even characters that didn't do the right thing, you would eventually come to understand why they acted that way, and you were able to sympathize with even the most heinous characters, and sometimes even their actions. It wasn't that none of these characters did bad decisions or that the bad decisions were eliminated or undone. It's that these bad decisions made us feel one way about them, but then through learning about their history, their trauma, we start to sympathize and come to understand why they choose to make wrong decisions sometimes. It's going deeper into these characters when they have different layers to them. But you need to give the characters autonomy for that. They need to make mistakes so that when we do unpack those different layers, we understand why they would make a mistake like that in the first place. This all comes back to actions and consequences, something Game of Thrones was brilliant at. Even if a character felt like a villain, such as Aemon and Alicent, the motivations for that villainy can come from a completely understandable place. The audience can still watch and even root for them in a way. I know many intelligent A Song of Ice and Fire fans who are on Team Lannister because they believe that family is best suited to rule the realm. You don't need to give each Lannister an easy out and not give them autonomy of their actions. It's their actions and the fact that they're not always good that made people root for them in the first place, because they knew that the Lannisters don't have as much of a hang-up on that whole honor and code stuff that a house like Stark does. But this show would have just given them all easy outs by saying they didn't do anything, it was all random happenstance and accidents. It's the consequences and deciding if that consequence is worth it that gives a character a feeling of realism. If we don't let characters actually make decisions, we can never understand what they're feeling from their point of view, because everything they've done was just accident. They never intended it. So then we can't even figure out what they intended in the first place. Look, I was warning you guys at the very beginning. Okay, maybe not the first episode. I was lukewarm on the first one, but then I started to see the issues pretty quick. Now, I can see the tide is beginning to shift here, which is okay. It's actually a good thing. This is the first season, and again, it can be a complete write-off since it was all nonsense backstory. But starting next season, they are under a microscope. We cannot give them these leeways to just insert some random event because it looks cool. Look, you can write your own fantasy world where stuff looks cool like that. But this world is about the intrigue and building real characters that have real consequences. And that's it. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with this. Tell us your thoughts. Did any of what I say resonate with you? Or did it not? Do you completely disagree? Put it all in the comments down below. I love to hear feedback, and especially something like this, I would really love to hear feedback on if this style is working for you. Again, leave it all in the comments down below. While you're down there, remember to like and subscribe. Finally, we're done.